My name is Margaret. I am 62 years old, and what I am about to tell you will forever change the way you look at family. Just 3 days ago, my own son Adrian and his wife Vanessa pushed my husband Edward and me off a cliff. As I lay there broken and bleeding, I heard Edward whisper the words that saved my life. "Margaret, don't move. Pretend we're dead." But that was not the worst of it. The worst was the truth Edward revealed to me afterward. A truth he had carried in silence for 22 years. For decades, I believed Daniel, our younger son, died in a tragic car accident. The police had said it was a brake failure. We buried him, mourned him, and tried to go on with our lives. But as I bled at the bottom of that cliff, Edward told me something that shattered me even more than my broken bones. He told me that Daniel's death was no accident. Adrian, our eldest, had tampered with his brother's car. He had killed him. And Edward had known all along. For 40 years, I thought we had built a perfect family. Edward and I lived a modest but beautiful life together. I worked as a nurse, and Edward ran the family company that had been passed down to him. We raised 2 boys under that roof, Adrian and Daniel. Adrian, our firstborn, was charming on the outside, but always carried a streak of arrogance. He believed everything should belong to him, simply because he was the eldest. Daniel, 5 years younger, was the heart of our home. He was intelligent, kind, and full of promise. Everyone who met him admired his humility and his brilliance. Even Edward used to say, "Daniel will take this family company to heights I never could." But Adrian could not stand living in his younger brother's shadow. And when Daniel's future began to look brighter than his, Adrian decided to act. He sabotaged his car one October night, and hours later, we were told our boy had died in a terrible accident. I lived 22 years believing a lie. Edward kept the truth hidden, he told me, because he wanted to protect the only son he had left. He had chosen silence over justice. He had chosen Adrian over Daniel. But Adrian didn't change after Daniel's death. If anything, he grew worse. He carried his entitlement into adulthood, marrying Vanessa, a woman who seemed sweet at first, but later revealed the same cold ambition. Adrian inherited the family company, but instead of nurturing it, he drained it. I would later learn he borrowed over $200,000 in the company's name, putting everything Edward had worked for at risk. And when Edward began to uncover Adrian's lies and debts, when I started asking questions about why our eldest was suddenly so interested in our will, Adrian and Vanessa decided to get rid of us too. That is why 3 days ago they invited us on a mountain trip. That is why we stood on the edge of a cliff smiling for photographs, while our own son and his wife plotted our deaths. The push came quickly, without hesitation. One strong shove and the world spun into chaos. My body hit the rocks below, blood filled my mouth, and the pain was unbearable. But Edward's whisper cut through the agony. "Margaret, don't move. Pretend we're dead." And so I did. I lay there among the rocks, broken, silent, and motionless, waiting for the story of 22 years of lies to finally come out. For 4 decades, Edward and I believed we had built the perfect family. Every morning, I woke up in our little suburban home where the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the chirping of birds outside. I would leave for the hospital where I worked as a nurse, and Edward would head to the office to oversee the family company. By evening, we would meet again at the dinner table, talking about our children and the future we dreamed of together. We had 2 sons. Adrian, our firstborn, was always bold and commanding, the kind of child who believed the world owed him something. He had his father's strong features but none of his patience. Adrian carried himself with pride, sometimes too much, and he hated when things didn't go his way. Daniel, our youngest, was the opposite. He was quiet but determined, humble but brilliant. He studied harder, listened more, and spoke less. Where Adrian would argue, Daniel would reason. Where Adrian demanded, Daniel offered. And in all my years as a mother, I thought I loved them equally. But deep down, I knew Daniel was the light of our home. Sundays were always my favourite. After church, the whole family would sit around the oak table Edward had carved with his own hands. Adrian would talk about his ideas for expanding the company, while Daniel would share his plans for school and the charities he wanted to support one day. He dreamed of building something meaningful, not just for himself, but for everyone. Those were the moments that made me proudest as a mother, watching my children imagine a future brighter than anything I had known. But I see now how dangerous that light became. Adrian, instead of being inspired by his brother, grew bitter. He didn't want to share the spotlight. He didn't want Daniel to become the pride of the family. He wanted everything for himself, and jealousy began to poison him long before we noticed. At night, when Edward and I would sit on the porch watching the stars, we would speak of the life we hoped for after retirement. We talked about traveling, downsizing our home, and someday playing with grandchildren in the garden. Never once did it cross my mind that those very children we prayed for could someday be used against us. Looking back now, I realized there were signs. The way Adrian's eyes hardened whenever Daniel spoke. The way he grew restless when teachers praised his younger brother. The silence that would fall over the room when the two of them were left alone together. I was a mother blinded by hope, desperate to believe my children would grow into men who supported each other. But life has a cruel way of showing us the truth. Daniel was taken from us at just 20 years old. The world called it an accident, but I know now it was murder. And the murderer was sitting across the table from me at every family dinner for the next 22 years. Before I go any further, let me pause to tell you this. If you are listening to my story, if you have made it this far, I ask you to subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments. Sharing stories like mine is not easy, but it matters because no one ever imagines betrayal until it comes from the people closest to them. Edward and I held on to our dreams even after Daniel's death, convincing ourselves that Adrian would eventually grow into the son we hoped he could be. He married Vanessa, a young woman from the next town, and for a while things seemed calm. She called me mother with a smile so sweet it almost fooled me. She helped me with chores, brought gifts, and made it seem like she wanted nothing more than to be part of our family. But beneath that sweetness was calculation. Vanessa, like Adrian, was driven not by love but by greed. Together they formed a partnership that would one day lead us to the edge of that cliff. I see it now so clearly. The family I thought I had, the family I built my whole life around, was already broken long before Adrian's hands touched my back and pushed me toward death. When Daniel died 22 years ago, I believed my world had ended. The police told us it was a tragic accident. His car had gone off the road late at night. They said the brakes failed. I wore black for months, unable to understand how a boy so full of life could be gone in an instant. But while I cried myself to sleep, Edward carried a secret he never shared with me until that night on the mountain. He had known the truth all along. Daniel's accident was no accident at all. He told me he saw Adrian that night. Our eldest son had been restless, angry, and jealous of his younger brother's future. Daniel was everything Adrian was not. Disciplined, loved, and respected. He had been chosen to one day take over the family company. Everyone could see his potential. Adrian, meanwhile, felt overlooked, living in Daniel's shadow despite being the firstborn. That evening, Edward saw Adrian working near Daniel's car. He didn't think much of it at the time. He assumed Adrian was fixing something or tinkering as boys often did. But hours later, when the police knocked on our door to say Daniel had been found dead, Edward's heart sank with a knowledge too terrible to admit. Adrian had tampered with the brakes. Edward confronted him afterward. He told me Adrian fell to his knees, swearing it had been a mistake, claiming he only wanted to scare his brother, not kill him. But Daniel was gone, and nothing could bring him back. And so Edward did what he thought was the only thing left. He chose silence. He told no one, not the police, not me, not even his sisters. He said he couldn't bear to lose both sons in the same night. So I lived 22 years in ignorance, building my life around a lie. I thought Daniel's death was fate. I thought Adrian was the dutiful son who had survived tragedy. But all along the murderer sat at my table, celebrated holidays in my home, and called me mother while carrying blood on his hands. It explained everything. the coldness I sometimes saw in Adrian's eyes, the way he avoided speaking about Daniel, changing the subject whenever his brother's name came up. I thought it was grief, but it was guilt. Guilt he never confessed to me. The more Edward spoke that night, the more shattered I became. He admitted that covering up the truth had chained him to Adrian's lies. By staying silent, he had given Adrian the power to grow darker, and grow darker he did. Adrian didn't stop after Daniel's death. Over the years, Edward began to notice money missing. At first small amounts, then larger ones. He discovered that Adrian had even borrowed a staggering sum, more than $200,000, in the company's name. It nearly destroyed everything Edward had worked for. When I asked Edward why he didn't confront him, he lowered his head. Because, he said, I already lost one son. I couldn't face losing another. He convinced himself Adrian would change, that guilt would turn him into a better man. But instead, Adrian only grew bolder. He learned that lies could protect him, that silence could shield him, and that his parents' love was too weak to hold him accountable. Hearing this truth 22 years too late broke me more than the rocks I had landed on. I realized that my family had not been destroyed at the bottom of a cliff. It had been destroyed decades earlier, the night Adrian reached into Daniel's car and made sure his younger brother never lived to see his dreams come true. And now, as I lay bleeding, I understood something Edward had been too afraid to face. If Adrian could kill his own brother for envy, then he could kill his parents for money. For years after Daniel's death, I tried to convince myself that Adrian had finally grown into a man. He had married Vanessa, started a family, and stepped into the company his father had built. To outsiders, he looked like the dutiful son who carried the family name forward. But inside our home, the cracks were already spreading. It began with small things. Edward noticed money going missing from the company accounts. At first, he assumed it was an error, a miscalculation, something that could be corrected with a phone call to the accountant. But then, it happened again, and again. Soon, the missing amounts grew larger, too large to ignore. One night, Edward stayed late at the office. That was when he found the truth. Papers were scattered across Adrian's desk, contracts, loan agreements, letters from banks. And there, in black and white, was the evidence that our eldest son had done something unforgivable. He had borrowed over $200,000 using the company's name. He had forged documents, signed contracts, and left the business drowning in debt. Edward told me he felt the blood drain from his body as he read those papers. That company was not just numbers on a page. It was his life's work, the legacy of generations before him, and the future we had once dreamed of leaving for our children. And Adrian had gambled it away like it was nothing. When Edward confronted him, Adrian didn't deny it. He shrugged. He said he was the rightful heir and had every right to use the company's name however he pleased. When Edward demanded to know how he planned to repay such a sum, Adrian simply smiled. "You'll figure it out, father. You always do." It was arrogance unlike anything I had ever seen. Not shame, not regret, only entitlement. And that was when Edward realized something chilling. Adrian wasn't just reckless, he was dangerous. But instead of turning him in, Edward once again chose silence. He told me he couldn't face the shame of letting the world know that his own son had betrayed him. He thought he could fix it quietly, just as he had buried the truth about Daniel. He thought protecting Adrian would keep our family together, but protecting Adrian only gave him more power. Vanessa began to notice Edward's hesitation, and soon she too became part of the manipulation. She encouraged Adrian's greed, whispered in his ear, and stood by him as he demanded more from us. It wasn't long before the questions started. Adrian asked about our will. He wanted to know what would happen to the house, the company, and our savings when Edward and I were gone. At first, I thought it was simple curiosity, but the persistence grew unsettling. He pressed us to sign documents, to make changes, to guarantee that everything would pass to him. He said it was to protect the family, but in my heart I knew better. The pressure became unbearable. Vanessa too would sit across from me with that sugar-coated smile, telling me we needed to think of the future, that Adrian was the only one capable of carrying the family name. I wanted to scream at her, to remind her that there had once been another son who carried that name with honor, a son whose life had been stolen by the man she called her husband. But I stayed silent, just like Edward, because as much as the truth burned inside me, I could not imagine losing the last child I had left. What I didn't know was that silence would not save me. It would only make me a target. Adrian's debts were piling higher, his fraud was catching up to him, and he knew it was only a matter of time before the walls closed in. So he and Vanessa decided to act. They told us they wanted to celebrate our wedding anniversary with a trip to the mountains, a gift to their beloved parents. But it wasn't a gift. It was a plan to erase us just as Adrian had erased his brother 22 years before. The invitation came like honey, sweet and irresistible on the surface, but poisoned at its core. Adrian and Vanessa told us they wanted to take us on a mountain trip. They said it was to celebrate our wedding anniversary, to give us a memory we would cherish forever. At first, I resisted. My health wasn't what it used to be, and Edward had been feeling tired in recent months. But they insisted. Adrian said the mountain air would do us good. Vanessa promised she would handle everything, the food, the supplies, even the transport. She said all we had to do was show up. I wanted to believe them. After all, they were our son and daughter-in-law, but a mother's instinct is rarely wrong. Something about the way Adrian looked at me when he made the suggestion chilled me. It wasn't affection. It wasn't even duty. It was calculation, as though the trip wasn't about celebration at all, but something else entirely. Edward, however, agreed. He said it would be nice to spend time with them, to bridge the gap that had grown between us. What I didn't know then was that Edward had already discovered Adrian's fraud, the $200,000 he had borrowed in the company's name. He had also begun to suspect that Adrian was planning something terrible, so when he agreed, it wasn't out of trust. It was because he wanted to watch him closely. The morning of the trip, Adrian was unusually cheerful. He whistled as he packed, cracked jokes, and kept talking about how beautiful the view from the mountain would be. Vanessa too was glowing, almost giddy, as if she were preparing for a wedding. To anyone else it might have looked like excitement. To me it felt like theatre. When we reached the base of the mountain, I felt unease grow inside me. The trail was steep and the air was thin. My body wasn't made for such climbs anymore, but Adrian and Vanessa urged us forward. "You can do it," they said. "It'll be worth it at the top." Their words were coated with sweetness, but their eyes betrayed them. As we climbed, Edward leaned closer to me. In a whisper, he revealed something that made my heart stop. He had set his phone to record. "If they try anything," he said, "we'll have proof." It was then that I realized Edward's suspicion wasn't just a passing fear. He knew Adrian wasn't taking us to the mountain to celebrate us. He was taking us there to kill us. The higher we climbed, the worse my dread became. Adrian kept leading us toward the narrowest paths, the most dangerous edges. Vanessa kept pulling out her phone, saying she wanted to capture memories. She urged us to stand closer together, closer to the cliffs. Every time she smiled, I felt my stomach twist. Finally, we reached a plateau. The view was breathtaking. The valley below stretched like a painting, rivers sparkling under the sunlight, trees swaying in the wind, but I could barely see it. My eyes were fixed on Adrian, who had positioned us at the very edge. "Let's take a family photo," Vanessa said sweetly. "Something unforgettable, unforgettable." The words sliced through me like a knife. My chest tightened, and I felt Edward's hand tremble as it gripped mine. We both knew. This wasn't about photos, this wasn't about celebration, it was about death. And we were standing exactly where they wanted us. I can still feel Adrian's hands on my back. Firm, cold, certain. It happened so quickly I barely had time to scream. One moment we were standing at the edge of the cliff, with Vanessa lifting her phone for a picture. The next, I felt the force of a shove, stronger than anything I could have imagined. My body lurched forward, weightless, the earth vanishing beneath me. The wind howled in my ears as I fell. The world blurred into sky and rock and terror. My heart hammered in my chest as the valley rushed up to meet me. I tried to call Edward's name, but all that escaped my lips was a broken cry, swallowed by the air. Then came the impact. My body slammed against the rocks with a violence that stole the breath from me. Pain exploded everywhere at once, sharp, crushing, unbearable. I tasted blood, felt it warm and metallic in my mouth. My arm bent at a sickening angle, my ribs screamed with every shallow breath, and I couldn't move without agony tearing through me. Beside me, Edward lay crumpled, his face pale, his body twisted by the fall. For a moment, I thought I had lost him. But then his lips moved, barely, weakly, and the words he spoke cut through the chaos like a lifeline. "Margaret," he whispered, each syllable a struggle. "Don't move." Pretend we're dead, I froze. My instincts screamed at me to cry out, to reach for him, to beg for help. But I forced myself still. My husband's voice carried an urgency I had never heard before, and then I heard them. Adrian and Vanessa's voices floated down from above. They were arguing at first, panicked, afraid someone might have seen. Then they grew calmer. "It's done," Adrian said flatly. "They'll say it was an accident," Vanessa replied. "No one will question it." My blood turned cold. My own son, the child I had carried, fed, and loved, was standing at the top of the cliff rehearsing his alibi while I lay broken at the bottom. Edward squeezed my hand, weak but steady. His eyes told me what his lips couldn't. Stay quiet, stay still. Let them believe their plan worked. So I did. I lay there like a corpse, my breath shallow, my body limp. Every muscle in me screamed to move, but I didn't. I let the pain drown me. I let the blood pool around me. And I played dead. Minutes felt like hours. Adrian and Vanessa lingered, pacing, whispering, making sure we weren't moving. At one point, I heard Vanessa laugh nervously. "Imagine the headlines," she said. "A tragic fall on their anniversary. So, perfect. That word pierced deeper than the rocks beneath me. Finally, their voices grew faint as they left, certain they had erased us. I dared not open my eyes. I dared not breathe too deeply. Only when silence returned to the mountain did I allow a single tear to slip down my face. In that silence, the truth echoed louder than ever before. Adrian had killed his brother. Adrian had tried to kill us. And this time, if we didn't act carefully, he would succeed. Edward's grip tightened slightly on my hand. He was still alive. We were both still alive. And as long as we breathed, there was still a chance to expose the evil we had raised in our own home. But at that moment, lying broken and battered at the bottom of a cliff, I knew one thing with certainty. The son I had once loved was gone. In his place stood only a monster. I don't remember the rescue. My memories of that night are a blur of flashing lights, rushing footsteps, and voices calling out orders. When I opened my eyes again, I was in a hospital bed, the sharp smell of disinfectant filling my lungs and machines beeping steadily beside me. My body ached everywhere, wrapped in bandages and needles, but the greater pain was not physical. It was the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. Edward lay in the bed next to mine, bruised and broken but alive. When our eyes met, tears welled in both of us. We had survived, but survival was only the beginning. Adrian and Vanessa visited. To the nurses and doctors, they were the picture of grieving children, distraught, tearful, holding our hands, whispering how sorry they were for what happened. To anyone watching, they looked like devoted family members. But to me, their touches burned. Their words were poison disguised as sympathy. One night, I pretended to sleep when they came in. My body was still, my breathing slow, but my ears caught every word. "Are you sure they won't wake up?" Vanessa whispered. "They won't," Adrian replied firmly. "The doctors said it themselves, and even if they do, we'll make sure no one believes a word they say." My heart pounded, but I stayed still. "They'll never prove anything," Adrian continued. "We'll tell everyone it was an accident, just like with Daniel. Hearing his name fall so casually from Adrian's lips nearly made me gasp. After 22 years, the truth I had only just learned from Edward spilled out into the open. "You should be careful bringing that up," Vanessa hissed. "If anyone hears—" "No one will hear," Adrian cut her off. "Father never told anyone. He buried it. Just like he'll be buried soon. It was like a knife twisting in my chest. My son was not only admitting his guilt, but mocking the silence Edward had carried for 2 decades. And he was planning to finish what he started. The nurse on duty must have sensed something. She lingered longer than usual outside the door that night. When Adrian and Vanessa finally left, she came in quietly and leaned over me. "Mrs. Margaret," she whispered, "I know you're awake." I heard them. I opened my eyes slowly, terrified, but she gave me a reassuring nod. "Don't worry, I'll report this." But that wasn't all. Edward, even in his broken state, had not forgotten his plan. He had set his phone to record before the mountain trip. Despite the fall, the device had survived in his jacket pocket. And when he finally managed to whisper this to me in the hospital room, my heart surged with hope. The proof we needed was right there. Not just my word, not just Edward's, but Adrian's voice, Vanessa's voice, their confessions caught in cold, undeniable sound. The walls that had protected Adrian for 22 years were finally beginning to crack. For the first time since Daniel's death, I felt the possibility of justice, but I also knew justice would not come easily. Adrian was clever, Vanessa was cunning, and they were desperate. And desperate people are the most dangerous of all. As I lay in that hospital bed, clutching Edward's trembling hand, I realized our battle was far from over. Surviving the fall was only step 1. Step 2 would be facing our son in a place he could no longer twist the truth to his advantage. That place would be a courtroom. The day of the trial arrived, and the courtroom was filled with faces, some familiar, many strangers, but all waiting to hear how a son could betray his parents in the most unthinkable way. Adrian sat there in his suit, calm and collected, as though the charges meant nothing. Vanessa clung to him, tears streaming down her face, playing the part of the loyal wife caught in tragedy. To anyone who didn't know the truth, they looked like victims. But I knew better. The prosecutor began by playing Edward's phone recording. The courtroom fell silent as Adrian's own voice echoed through the speakers. "It's done. They'll say it was an accident." Just like with Daniel, gasps filled the room. Heads turned. Reporters scribbled furiously. In one moment, the mask Adrian had worn for 22 years shattered. The world finally heard what Edward and I had carried in silence for far too long. The nurse who had overheard their whispers in the hospital testified next. She spoke with courage, recounting every word Adrian and Vanessa had said. Piece by piece, the facade they had built crumbled until nothing remained but the truth. Adrian's lawyers tried to twist the story. They painted him as a man under stress, desperate, misunderstood. Vanessa claimed she had only gone along with him out of fear, but the evidence was overwhelming. The fraud, the recording, the attempted murder, and above all, the revelation of Daniel's death. When the judge delivered the sentence, I felt a strange calm wash over me. Adrian and Vanessa were both found guilty of fraud, guilty of attempted murder, and guilty of Daniel's murder all those years ago. They were sentenced to life in prison without parole. I should have felt joy. I should have felt victory. But what I felt was something different. Grief. Not for the monster Adrian had become, but for the boy I had once cradled in my arms. That boy was long gone, buried the night he killed his brother. All that remained was a stranger wearing his face. But Edward and I were not left empty-handed. Adrian and Vanessa's children, innocent in all of this, needed a home. We could not let their parents' sins define their futures. So we took them in. They now live with us, filling the silence of our home with laughter once more. We tell them stories about Daniel, their uncle who was the heart of our family. We remind them that kindness and honesty are the only true legacies worth carrying. The scars on my body will never fully heal. The scars in my heart may never fade. But I have learned that silence is the deadliest poison of all. Edward's silence cost Daniel his life. My silence nearly cost us ours. But now the truth has spoken, and it will never be buried again. I am 62 years old. I survived a fall meant to kill me. I survived a betrayal meant to silence me. And today, I am telling you my story, so no parent, no mother, no father, will ever ignore the warning signs hidden inside their own home. Because sometimes, the greatest danger doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the very blood that runs through your veins. If you've stayed with me through this story, I want to thank you. And before you go, I have one request. Subscribe to this channel, drop your thoughts in the comments, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Your support means the world to me, and it gives me the strength to keep sharing stories like this.